Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining today. Quite a few of you here. And hopefully, I think a lot of you in the room are actually very familiar faces. A lot of you know me, and I've worked with you before in the past or in different projects. So today, I'm going to be talking through, in the spirit of new beginnings, I'm going to be talking through some of the lessons learned from my past experience in my about 20 years career. I'm going to be drawing on some specific examples from some projects that I've worked on. And in my journey to date, I started on a very conventional systems engineering approach, but then have progressively moved more towards model-based systems engineering. And that's led me to sort of different experiences, new experiences, but also just a sort of a realization that the current climate that most of us face in terms of our systems engineering delivery is that there is a lot more uncertainty in the world out there, that boundaries and constraints on projects are very different. The audiences that we have to talk to are also very different as well. And all this has led to, essentially, some of you might be familiar with the acronym VUCA, which just talks about the fact that there's volatility in the broader environment around us, a lot which leads to uncertainty, complexity as well in terms of the number of stakeholders that we have to engage with on a program, which also in turn leads to ambiguity, particularly when it comes to talking to people from different backgrounds. And all of these combined lead us to a new way of working, or having to define a new normal. So what I'm hoping to share with you is that, off the back of the experiences I've had in my career to date, the kind of lessons that I've learned and steps that I've taken to help me try and define what that new normal looks like. I'm getting a bit of an echo here, so I just want to check very quickly. Can everyone hear me okay? Brilliant, thank you. So hopefully most of you are familiar with this perspective of systems engineering. Not my diagram. I have to give credit to Richard Beasley for this diagram. It was on a post he put up on LinkedIn. But most organisations that I've worked with have tended to have systems engineering sitting as a integrated function as part of the overarching engineering team and development, and a lot of responsibility for primarily bringing together the technical delivery of a programme, but with some outreach into the wider organisation, whether that's to do with programme delivery and engagement, or to do with helping to support wider business case decisions. I want to contend that systems engineering isn't just an engineering function. It's actually more of a holistic, organisation-wide approach that we need to be thinking about in order to make sure that we are successful in integrating and delivering a holistic picture, and a successful delivery as well. And just to sort of reiterate some of the points that I raised earlier, some of the experiences that I'm going to be talking about have seen examples of volatility. The solution to that, I'm contending, is having a clear vision for what we want to achieve from a programme or an organisational delivery. I'm saying that we want to move away from uncertainty and try to get a better understanding. We want to articulate and get rid of some of the complexities that we see on programmes and bring better clarity to what we're trying to deliver, making sure that all of our stakeholders are supportive of the overall picture. And we also need flexibility, agility, to be able to respond to changes in demand. I think gone are the days where you had a clear boundary for what needed to be achieved. Oftentimes we're caught in funding cycles or changes in government, for example, with competing demands that mean that we have to be flexible but also able to argue our case. One of the things that I've seen most often in my experience has been about sort of silos within organisations and programmes. And the example that I'm going to reference here is from a programme that I worked on in Australia called Cross River Rail. So I was involved in this programme back in 2018. It was just about to sort of launch, and the program was about upgrading a rail network in Brisbane, but also adding some new infrastructure to the route as well. And part of the difficulties with that was that the client organisation, Queensland Rail, recognised that they wanted to take a systems engineering approach to solving and delivering the program, that it helped as a critical enabler to what was quite a complex program with multiple stakeholders that need to be integrated. The way that they'd broken down the program was initially geographic, so they'd had an overground element to the program and an underground element to the program. Within that, there were different splits. So the overground program was also meant to be responsible for integrating the whole program together, but without necessarily the infrastructure or the insight into the other party delivering the underground sections of the route. And the client wanted to be kept on side, wanted to be involved in any major decisions that came up with the program. In particular, where there were going to become conflicts, particularly to do with commercial aspects or timeline program delivery. One particular example of that was to do with understanding that the construction of the tunnels and the underground facilities was actually, from a timeline perspective, going to take a lot longer than some of the overground work, and that naturally led to conflicts within the program and planning, as well as issues to do with some of the program and commercial conversations that needed to take place. The outcome of the conversations was that a system integrator would be really great to help facilitate conversations between the different parties and different stakeholders involved to try and bring some of those conversations together. That necessitated trying to carry out a system breakdown to help understand who was responsible for what, but also what the actual solution might look like. You didn't want to end up with one solution for the overground system versus a different system for the underground solution. As an extension to looking at this issue of overcoming silos, I also want to introduce some of my experiences of working in the fusion sector. So I did work at UK Atomic Energy Authority, initially with their demo fusion reactor program, but also on some of their other reactor programs. And as part of the team there, one of the key issues that we had was about actually the geographic split of the expertise related to fusion technology. The UK had expertise in particular areas. Other countries, such as Germany, had technical expertise in other areas. Over and on top of that, there was also funding and budget constraints. So the funding was through a central resource in Europe who set both the budget and the program timetables for the different work that was taking place. We'd often have to start planning for a year's work at least 6 months in advance, and sometimes it could be very difficult to articulate what work was needed, what the priority areas were, where particular interfaces would be happening, particularly for areas where technology needed to come together. And as part of my role here, I helped introduce the use of model-based systems engineering into the program. And some of the benefits for this was helping us to remove language barrier. So although the main language that was used on the program was English, naturally we had a team that was diverse in its background, trying to work in different time zones, but also people with different levels of language skills. Introducing model-based systems engineering into the mix helped set things down in a concrete way that everyone could relate to, And it helped introduce a focus on the functionality of the system or the product that we wanted to deliver. In particular, where it really helped was around trying to articulate the range of interfaces that were involved and actually the understanding the number and the type of stakeholders that we had to engage with. This enabled us to make sure that those conversations were focused and also taking place with the right people. This meant having to bring in commercial and program stakeholders into the conversation to make sure that finance constraints and planning of what project priorities were happening in a timely manner. And I think bringing that into the mix really helped improve the stakeholder management in particular. But it also helped us with understanding scalability. We're able to apply this to very quick, specific one-off projects, but also use it in planning activities and events over sort of multi-year type projects as well. I just wanted to also expand on the non-technical elements that I think pose a challenge to implementing successful systems engineering. So a couple of years ago, I worked on a program called the Trans-Pennine Route Upgrade, where I was involved particularly with migration planning of the program across the route. And for those of you that some of you I know in the room are already familiar with the program, you're currently working on it, but for those of you that aren't familiar with it, it's an upgrade program in the railway sector which is looking at a range of infrastructure and operational upgrades in the sort of central north region of England, connecting Liverpool, Manchester, York, Leeds region, and trying to improve both the infrastructure but also the number of journeys available to passengers and increasing uptake of passenger flow. Some of the infrastructure changes that are being introduced include things like improved signalling and the introduction of electrification to help, again, improve performance and increase sort of availability of journeys for passengers. Thank you. So, again, delving a little bit into the background for there, some of you in the room will appreciate this because I know from that background, but the UK rail market is actually quite disparate. We have Network Rail, who look after the infrastructure, and within Network Rail, we also have specific regions that look after localised support, upgrades, planning, maintenance, and new build. We also have the train operators, who cover a wide range. There's the passenger train operators, there's also the freight train operators. Overarching all those, we have the different local authority bodies, and as you can appreciate from a geographic point of view, this route covers multiple local authority areas. Some of those might be willing to provide funding, others might have particular constraints on the types of upgrade and opportunity that are appropriate for their local authority area. And a huge sort of issue here was actually getting all of those stakeholders to be open and sharing information to enable us to deliver a successful program and sequencing the delivery of that work altogether. One example was around driver training to do with upgrades to rolling stock for introducing electrification and new signalling technologies. One particular issue that came up was around different train operators needing different lead times to introducing training for the new signalling boards that were coming up and having to factor that into the program. So part of the response to this was to try and collate data, bring that together and articulate it so that we could appropriately sequence all the different elements of the work that was taking place. I wanted to bring up an example here. So this isn't one that I've worked on directly, but I've had the opportunity to talk with colleagues from both Thameslink and from WSP who have done related pieces of work around introducing a system integrator. And one of the lessons learned for me from the TRU experience was actually needing an appropriate forum, an appropriate vehicle for bringing stakeholders together to formally have conversations, and getting agreement and buy-in to a way forward for delivering pieces of work. And this is just an example from the Great Western Programme of the type of forum that they set up and the way they structured it. I've seen multiple iterations of this in other programmes where we've had very simplistic system integrators, but we've also had slightly different structures to it. So I'm aware that HS2, for example, has a similar version to this. But the key message, and I guess the key take-home from this approach, was actually needing to introduce some level of formality in terms of stakeholder engagement. So we have the different sources of information, whether that's from the model-based systems engineering approach, whether that's from migration planning, or however we're implementing the systems engineering processes that we have for a particular program. But making sure that that data and information is available to the stakeholders, to the relevant stakeholders, to support sensible decision-making, sometimes need to be considered and can be something that we might need to formalise as part of having a system integrator approach. I want to sort of push that concept a little bit further, and I'm going to talk about a more recent example in a second, but one observation that I took away from all of these different elements together was that sometimes it could be very difficult to think about how a particular project or a particular program fits within the aspiration of what an organisation wants to deliver, or actually why an organisation is doing a particular piece of work. I think taking an enterprise management approach in this context is particularly relevant and particularly important, because we do get a push-pull from the business part of an organisation that says, we need to do X. The engineering team saying, well, we need to translate that into actually delivering Y. But actually we end up with something in the middle called Z, which can not quite meet everything that of what the original intention was. And really, for me, what this boiled down to was we often have typically a business case for a particular piece of work, however big, however small. Most projects and programs boil down to a need that's usually articulated in a business case type document, and that we need to demonstrate how that need has been met. And taking a more holistic enterprise approach to it, for me, is about encouraging collaboration, encouraging open conversation, trying to break down some of those barriers that we sometimes see within projects in the context of that's purely an engineering conversation, that's purely a planning conversation, that's a commercial conversation. And for me, this is about changing the dynamic of how organisations and collaborative partners work together. So rather than having a sort of them and us approach to delivering programs and projects, what I'm saying is that we need to think of more of a collaborative us type of approach to delivering programs. And I think that CBOK provides a very good reference for how we can look at this. And I'm going to just talk about, in my next example, a project that I worked on more recently, where I was trying to bring this together and trying to support that more holistic approach. So more recently, I've worked on East West Railway, and very similar to the TRU project, it's partially an upgrade program, partially a new build program, looking at building new railway line between Oxford to Milton Keynes. Oxford to Milton Keynes, Milton Keynes to Cambridge, where Oxford to Milton Keynes was an upgrade program, and Milton Keynes to Cambridge is a new build program. And similar to TRU, there were similar geographic constraints in the context of working with multiple stakeholders, so different network rail regions, different train operators along the route, different local authority bodies, and actually a lack of clarity on what those boundaries were. The different stakeholders also had different perspectives on what a successful outcome looked like. We were also faced with funding constraints and actually changes in priority of our primary funder, which meant that we had to be flexible and agile in order to be consistent with our messaging for what we were trying to do, what we were trying to achieve. The delivery of the program was actually also highly connected to the successful outcome of other pieces of work, but also key in the success of delivery of other policies. So perhaps not the most popular reference to call out, but some of you may remember the sort of Liz Truss policy about local growth, local development, and part of that holistic business case. So just to sort of I really wanted to bring this together as an example of trying to bring together all those different concepts that I was talking about previously, which were along the lines of a volume of data that needed to be articulated, and proposing a model-based systems approach to try and articulate the volume of information we were dealing with, trying to plan and trying to sequence the delivery of that piece of work, using a migration plan to help try and prioritize and sequence the work, who needed to be involved and when, and then having a stakeholder group, a system integrator body, bringing together stakeholders, making sure that stakeholders were being brought in at the right point in time, that we had the right stakeholder conversations taking place in order to make appropriate decisions and bringing people together. So for me, this was really a sort of opportunity to try and have that fully integrated approach, and actually the benefits of taking that system integrator approach by having the data, being able to look ahead and see where that was going to take us, and making sure that all stakeholders were involved in conversations and decisions about the programme. And where that's sort of taken me on my journey for systems engineering is, at the start, I mentioned about being in a very conventional, traditional systems engineering approach. And my pathway over the last couple of years has really taken me on sort of what's next in terms of integration. Integration then led me to model-based systems engineering as an approach, as a different way of articulating information. And then working together within a sector, within a particular industry field, to integrate and take a fully integrated approach, vertical approach. And then enterprise systems engineering, because not only does the delivery of a program impact on how that's successfully delivered, but actually there's a lesson to be learned, taken away from how we reflect on the organisation itself and how that organisation is working and developing. And I think different elements of what I've seen in my journey to date has meant that organisations have made changes in the way they structure themselves to be more responsive and more agile to the successful delivery of programmes. One sort of non-rail example that I wanted to share, and some of you may know more about this than I do, is that this sort of concept, this sort of enterprise approach has also transferred across into other sectors. So Atkins were significantly involved in promoting an energy systems architecture body. And I've put a couple of references there. I'm not going to go into too much detail about this today. It's not my field of expertise, but I wanted to highlight it as an alternative way of working for large and major programs, and in the fact that the idea of working as a system integrator is catching on in terms of being agile, being able to respond more flexibly to the challenges that we're seeing in the world today. It's the recognition that there are bigger things going on beyond the boundaries of the projects that we're working on, that mean that it's not just a one-way street in the delivery of individual projects and programs. The projects and programs that we're working on feed back into a bigger picture of what's going on in the world around us. A typical example from the rail world that relates to this as an example is around electrification. One of the challenges that I've often come up against is our energy operator in the UK sometimes does come back to and say, rail electrification is not a priority for us. our priority is providing electricity supply for housing growth. And I think moving forward, having more of these overarching system operators, systems integrators will allow us to be more connected with the bigger world around us and enable us to articulate the questions that need to be answered, but also bringing together the stakeholders to be able to identify the topics that are of concern to us and enable us to have fruitful conversations about how we resolve some of those challenges that we face, whether that's technical, program-related, commercial-related, even funding-related issues. And really that's, for me, the sort of key message that I think it'd be good to take away with this. Just to sort of summarise, really, why do I think systems integration is a good approach? For me, it's really about the collaboration aspects. I couldn't argue that more strongly, I think. In order to achieve a successful delivery of any programme, whether small or large, I think it's important to understand the bigger influences, the bigger constraints that we each have to deal with and how they impact on projects and the pieces that we're delivering. This is how we add value in the work we do as systems engineers, I think. And it's about, I think for me, just being able to have that awareness of the bigger picture and how it impacts on what we do in our day jobs is particularly important. That includes successful delivery of specific items up to how we design our organisations and the capability we have to deliver good systems engineering and projects. So thank you very much for your time and your patience. Very short presentation, and I want to open the floor to questions.
Hi, Joanne Dawson from Think Systems UK. Thanks, Tanya. That was really interesting to see the different messages. And, you know, what I'm interested in asking a question about is how can people who are working on projects find out experiences from other interfacing projects or other projects that have done something similar? I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned and a lot of legacy information that will be useful to other people working on projects. How do we access that in the best way?
Sure. Thank you. So I think maybe just take the first element there, Joe. I think how do we find out about what other people are doing? A big part for me is the way I've gone and learnt about other things that are happening is, one, by getting involved in a different range of projects, but two, also coming to events like this, whether it's ASEC or whether it's a small working groups, building bridges and getting to know other people and learning about what different people are doing. So a lot of this, of what I put up here, some of it has come directly from my personal experience and the opportunity that I've had to work on different projects. Some has been through engaging with colleagues who have had experience on different pieces of this. So, for me, I completely acknowledge that the system integrator concept wasn't necessarily new or particular to me. Other colleagues have done fantastic work in this space, and similarly in the model-based systems engineering space. And I think in terms of your second part to your question, which is how do we sort of build on that, how do we have that, how do we sort of continue that into the future, if I understood correctly? I think for me we're at that cusp of having a good opportunity of maybe different organisations coming together and trying to build some sort of central piece of work. We saw from the McPherson lecture earlier today the work that's taking place with respect to healthcare. Last year I was involved in giving a presentation to a small subset of group working in the healthcare sector. And I think part of me is sort of saying we need to sort of keep having those conversations and bringing people together, but actually maybe thinking on the lines of the energy systems operator and saying we probably need to build something equivalent in the respective sectors because this is sort of something I think needs to be pushed out more generally as a way of working. It's not just about it being a siloed approach to delivering programs and projects.
Hi, Tanya.
Hi, Sarah.
Sarah Wrightley. nuclear security technologies. Overall, thanks for the presentation. Overall, your experience working in the different countries, what are the main sort of challenges in that system integrator role, and are there different tools and techniques you've had to use in those different countries over the time?
Sure, thank you. So the main challenge that I've seen in the context of working in different countries has been about the maturity of the market in accepting systems engineering as a way of working. Taking my experience working in Australia specifically, the market there is, although perhaps relatively new to working in systems engineering, they're also very open to the best way forwards. There's been a really strong uptake, for example, on model-based systems engineering approaches in Australia, whereas other markets have sort of different levels of uptake and different levels of how they define that way of working as well. So, for example, working in America, I've had to be mindful of the type of terminology that I use working in America, the type of systems engineering language they use. And for me, my personal experience is that this is one reason why model-based systems engineering can be really useful, because it does take away some of that language barrier issue that I've seen. Because at the end of the day, it's a commonality, and it removes some of the duplication, some of the that we can see in different levels of understanding, different levels of experience. It can be adjusted to suit different languages, different backgrounds, different levels of experience and ways of working.
Hello, Simon Tinling from Nuclear Waste Services. Tanya, thanks very much for sharing those valuable experiences. My question was on one of your early observations, which was that large infrastructure projects typically suffer from silos, not just in between the disciplines concerned, but the partner organisations. A lot of work has gone in over the years to try and solve that through different contracting models, different partnering arrangements, and so on. And I just wondered how successful you felt those have been, what there is still to do, and perhaps where those contracting arrangements don't yet connect to some of the approaches you're talking about.
Sure, absolutely. Completely understand the background to that question, because again, in my experience, I've seen several different contracting models in my time for different projects. And I think for me, this is where I can't emphasize enough the value of having a system integrator, that overarching perspective for a program. Where I've seen the system integrator implemented successfully, it's allowed appropriate representation from the different bodies involved in that program to come and to have their engagement and appropriate forum for them to engage and bring their concerns or their solutions as well to delivering a program as well. The structure of that system integrator will be different depending on the nature of the program, the type of contracting structure you might have, and it does need to be individualized, I think, to the project and the type of stakeholders that you have involved. But for me, that's kind of been the best approach, is to make sure there is that sort of overarching body that has that perspective of where are we going with this piece of work. Because stakeholders do change over time, over a life cycle. There'll be some stakeholders who are consistent across the life cycle of that delivery. There'll be other stakeholders who change. As an example, when I was working on HS2, we had some changes from design through to construction to testing and commissioning, where there were stages where, at testing and commissioning, where because the designer was no longer involved in the program, there were some issues around the sort of testing and commissioning, or questions that were being raised that where it would have been useful to have design representation, someone to go to and say, where do we come, how do we deal with this particular topic or this particular issue? And for me, that's the benefit of having that system integrated. It's about having that continuity across the program, recognizing that different stakeholders will drop in, drop out, depending on where we are in the delivery of that program.
Richard Beasley from RB Systems, now not Rolls-Royce. It's an observation, but I appreciate your reaction to the challenge of this. But I'm coming to realise that systems engineers need to be as much, if not more, interested in the organisation that does the engineering rather than the technical solution. But we all joined engineering because we like techie stuff. So how much of a challenge is it that looking at the organisation is too boring for an engineer?
Sure. Yeah, so I agree. I think I certainly know from my own background, I initially started off as a mechanical engineer, looking at rail vehicles, and that was my entry into this space at all. So I recognise that in this room we have people from different backgrounds with different interests, and again, for me, that's the value of having the system integrator, because it's about making sure that everyone with their appropriate and relevant experience has a voice to the development and delivery of a program. We need that range of experience and domain knowledge and specific knowledge, because, as I was alluding to earlier, there will be different points of conversation that come up where certain expertise is required, whether that be domain-specific, more general, or business-related experiences. And I think it's all valuable, but it's about acknowledging and being able to articulate the how, the when, or of what those appropriate conversations are, when they should be happening, and making sure that people are brought in at the appropriate time to share their experience and contributions to that.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Hello, Tanya. That was a very good presentation. Thank you very much. My name is Princess Daisy from Leonardo. I just wanted to ask a quick question. I understand that most of your system integrator role has been more international and across different countries, but I was more talking about like within the business, that's like quite a big business that's working on a lot of systems, and you're in the process of working on a project that's already gone to some level already, but the different parts of that one system are quite isolated, and although they understand the need of system integration, how would you, based on your experience, help to, say, get those different systems to start working in collaboration, understanding the fact that all of these are all part of one system and the need for system integration? And I understand that you also said there needs to be an overarching organization or team that works on this system integrator. But if that's not part of the business, how do you get that sort of thing integrated into that business without having to create new teams or anything like that? Or as an individual, how can you support that sort of thing?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, thank you. And you're absolutely right. I think the nature of a lot of the programs that I've seen is that it's oftentimes not just one organisation or not just one team that's delivering a particular piece of work. I've seen two contrasting experiences, I think, in my personal experience of how that's been successfully achieved. One has been sort of bottom up, and that's been when I was working on the nuclear fusion side of things. A lot of the conversations were happening engineer to engineer, with a realisation and an acknowledgement that there was a gap, that there needed to be some bigger picture aspect, holistic aspect, bringing everything together. And so the demand for that came actually from bottom up, from the engineers, saying we need to have something come together to work more collaboratively together, to be able to articulate, so we're not doing things that are in competition with each other or not at the right sort of sequence and timeline of events. So the demand there actually came bottom up, and then getting people together in a room to say, okay, as a collective body of organisations, we need to maybe think about how we create that forum and defining an appropriate term of reference for working as different organisations together. Conversely, with some of my rail experience, it's been the other way around, because it's usually been the client organisation, so the organisation at the top, that has said and recognised we cannot deliver this programme as one entity. We recognise that there's going to be a need for multiple teams to help us deliver this, but we need to be able to have one body that helps engagement and interaction across that delivery and across the range of stakeholders. So I think it's a bit of both. I think it's recognising that We as individual engineers can challenge, we can promote and share, or share our knowledge and our experiences and request about the ability to work together. We don't necessarily need to have a formal system integrator structure to be able to create that within ourselves and to create those bodies together. It can start as simply as just having a technical system integrator before developing further into other sectors like the program side of things. Or conversely, if you've got an educated leadership team, promoting it through that way as well. Does that answer your question? Because I feel like I'm not answering your question. Thank you.
Thank you for that last question. And Tanya, thank you for sharing your personal journey.
Thank you very much. Thank you.